welcome you to Television Aboard Your Boat. Our goal in this session is to answer questions boaters have about satellite TV technology, and in particular, what you need to know to select the right system for how and where you use your boat. In the process, we'll talk about a lot of things, including system features, trends, programming options, and streaming versus satellite television. Our panel is well prepared to do this. They represent decades of marine experience, and they come from different perspectives. A manufacturer, a boat builder, full-service vessel and marina operator, and a yacht management company that also sells and installs boating electronics. I'm your host for the session. I'm Jim Fullalove, editor of Marine Electronics Journal. That's a trade magazine we publish for the National Marine Electronics Association, which is just about everyone in the marine electronics industry. Here's a little history for you to begin. When I joined the magazine back in 1997, we ran a story about the best onboard electronics at that time, from autopilots to single sideband radio telephones and everything in between. There were also three satellite categories. One was data, one was voice and data, and the third was satellite TV. A company named Trimble took the data category and KVH took the other two, and that was back in 1997. So let's meet the panel. Justin, will you lead off, please? Tell us a little about yourself.
Hello, I'm Justin Abernethy, the Vice President of Operations for Ocean Alexander Yachts on the East Coast of Florida, the Caribbean, Bahamas, Central South America. We also do a lot with Europe service as well. We receive all of the Ocean Alexander yachts. They come from Kaohsiung, Taiwan. We get them off cargo. We do all of the commissioning, the warranty, custom installs, setting up the SAT TV systems for the clients when they go to close on the boats, and just all around everything.
Great. Chuck, can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I sure can. My name is Chuck Cashman. I am Chief Revenue Officer for MarineMax. We're a boat retailer, and probably in this line bring in close to 200 boats that are capable of having the SAT TV and upgraded electronics on our units. So plus whatever we sell pre-owned. So I think I'm here to represent the voice of the customer.
Okay, great. Mark, how about you?
Yeah, glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me. Hello, everybody. My name is Mark Carreri. I'm the president of Marine Professionals Incorporated, MPI. We're located in South Florida in Fort Lauderdale. We do refit yacht management, marine electronics, audio, video, networking, and we do emergency and crisis services where we have a plane and fly all over the Bahamas and Keys, Eastern Seaboard, all over to fix boats. So we've been in business 23 years now. This is our 23rd year in business. We do, like I said, a lot of marine electronics, audio, video, and we do a lot of KVH. That's our go-to SAT TV and VSAT product. So,
thank you, Mark. Ken, and you.
Hi, Jim. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending. My name is Ken Loki. I work for KVH Industries. I've had the privilege of working for them for the last 17 years. Wearing a lot of different hats, primarily in the customer experience department. Right now, I'm the senior customer experience advisor for KVH. And basically, I help and assist people in all different markets since I've been there for the last 17 years, in the commercial market, the leisure market, the land mobile market. So I have just a skosh of information that I can talk to you about as it relates to satellite TV. See how, and I've been living it for the last 17 years of my professional career. So hopefully you guys can learn something from me today.
That's great. Well, thanks, panel. Appreciate that. The session is scheduled to run until 3, but we can extend a bit if that seems necessary, with questions from the audience in addition to ones we pose. And if you have questions, if the audience does have questions, you can go to the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom screen and enter them there. We'll take a look at them and we'll answer as many as we can as time permits. So we're going to throw the first question to Ken. Let's start by asking a basic question. How does satellite TV at sea work, and does dome size matter in relation to the system's capabilities?
Thank you, Jim, for the question. I think it's a great leading question to set the foundation for this seminar. And I'd like to take the opportunity to sort of answer this question in two ways. First of which is just with one word, flawlessly. If you bring a KVH on board and have it professionally installed by one of our 300 dealers around the country. But secondarily, we take advantage of the two providers that are most prominent in the US, which is DirecTV and Dish Network's footprint. So the way it works is DirecTV and Dish, they'll send a signal across the United States of America, basically for the home customers that have the big oblong parabolic dishes on their house. And what happens when they do that is that the signal doesn't just end at the shoreline, it bleeds into the ocean. So our CEO and founder back in the early 90s had the vision of taking advantage of that bleed and providing customers the opportunity of having satellite TV on board by manufacturing antenna systems that will pick up that signal and then provide that same home DirecTV satellite TV experience on the boat. So it's not like DirecTV or Dish Network beams their services over water. It's basically meant for land, but if you think about it as, this is a terrible analogy, but I'll try to use it as best as I can. It's like a spray paint can. So if you have a spray paint can and you're close, you can sort of get that stream nice and narrow to what you're pointing at. But when you're 22,300 miles in space and trying to beam that signal over a certain part of the continental United States, I mean, it's going to bleed into the ocean. So fortunately for us and for you as consumers, that bleed exists. We have people that make antennas, which you put on your boat in order to take advantage of that bleed. You put a receiver on board, whether it's for DirecTV or Dish Network, you activate the service, and voila, you have DirecTV on your boat. So the second part of that question is, does the antenna size matter? And it only matters as it relates to how far offshore you want to go. So as I mentioned before, because you have the concentration of the beam over land, the smaller the antenna, the closer you can stay by the shore and still get a relatively strong signal. But as you go out into the ocean, that signal gets weaker. So what that means is that you just get a larger dish in order to have TV in the areas that you want to watch TV in. So we have antenna sizes that are, 12.5 inches in diameter that weigh 8 pounds that are good for 50 miles offshore, and all the way up to 1 meter antennas that have the ability to track satellite signals for 200 plus miles offshore. So the bigger the dish, the further offshore you can go and still receive that signal, is basically how it works.
So for those of us who'd like to look under the hood, I mean, anybody who's been to a boat show has probably seen the 3-axis machinery under the dome. But can you, without getting too techie, just give us sort of the 30-second version on how that works, how that keeps you focused on the geostationary satellites?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's people back at KVH that are way smarter than I am, and they developed these antenna systems that, in a nutshell, basically are the parabolic dishes on a house. The only difference is that they're stabilized, so they have the ability to track while in motion. When you're on the water, whether you're at the dock, you're moving. So if you put a home parabolic dish on your boat, those are fixed. Those are pointed directly at the satellite, and they're not meant to move. But for the stabilized antenna systems that we make, they have all kinds of software and technology built into them where it's basically sniffing the energy from the satellite and doing some sort of con scan, which basically zeroes in on that energy, and as a result produces a signal through the DirecTV or Dish Network receiver onto your television. I mean, that's probably as basic I can get with it without losing the audience.
Yep. Oh, that's great. Thanks, Ken.
You're welcome.
Mark, this one to you. There are many considerations involved in purchasing an onboard satellite TV system. What questions do customers and dealers, installers need to discuss to ensure that the right satellite TV system is selected?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So there's a lot of things you want to consider. First of all, you need to have live TV, or a lot of people are streaming right now, or do you want to have both? Do you want to watch TV while you're underway, or do you want to watch it just while you're at the dock? So those are some things. And then where you're going to travel. There's as Ken mentioned, there's different size domes the farther you go offshore. So it depends on where you're going to travel. If you're going to be close to shore or further away, maybe in the Bahamas or something like that. Okay. We can get into what type of boat do you have? Do you have a power boat or a sailboat? Because then you want to look at maybe your mounting locations and things like that for the dome. And then do you have a budget? That's last but not least, but always it comes down to money kind of a thing. And, and then, Ken kind of touched on like the size of the dome. Up until recently, the high definition transmissions, with DirecTV were only available on the much bigger domes. And we had a customer that insisted on having, high definition TV, but it was a 40-foot boat. So now you've got this humongous dome on a 40-foot boat, and it just looked out of place. But, you kind of want to match, the dome size to the boat as well. So, all those things are something to consider, when you're considering satellite TV.
So kind of a follow-up to that, Mark, back to you. What are some of the most important product features to look for when choosing a system?
Well, you can consider whether you are okay with like standard definition or high definition like you have in your home. I mean, high definition is available now. Years ago, that wasn't an option, or you had to pay, a lot more money to get high definition. So, there's you can get that now, with some of the smaller domes and different, service providers. So, another thing is like your ease of use, and, do you want everyone to watch the same channel on the boat, or do you want everybody to watch something different like you have in your house? You wouldn't think that. People don't think about watching the same thing in their house, but only if they're on the same channel. But in a boat, you need to have a separate, receiver to watch something different. So that's something different. It's something to consider as well.
Okay, good. Justin, to you, Ocean Alexander puts a satellite system aboard every boat that you all build. So why is satellite TV considered to be an essential feature on a yacht?
Well, a lot of these owners nowadays, these yachts are more expensive than the actual homes that they live in, the residential homes. They all, our yachts have typically all of the same, if not more, amenities than what a residential home does. It's also creating an experience, being able to watch TV while you're out at sea or at the dock, or cruising up and down the ICW. It's a very attractive feature. Keeping up with live sports, news, shows with friends and family helps create a bigger feeling to the customer, overall more of a comfort thing, and it creates it just helps create a better feeling of comfort. And they can watch all the local stations. I don't think they can watch the stations they can have at their house per se. If they live in New York or Baltimore, if they're here, I think they can only get those stations. But essentially, there's four things really that clients can't go without on their yachts, and that's refrigeration, waste systems, air conditioning, and TV. So that's, yeah. That's pretty much.
I can agree with that.
Well said.
So back to TV for a second here. What are your customers' expectations about what they're going to be able to watch at sea? Do they compare it to their TVs at home, which, you know, if you get used to that kind of service, clarity, whatever, you know, you're looking for, you want to match that on the boat. Is that their expectations? And do the at-sea systems live up to those expectations?
Yes. I mean, we have in our sound with subwoofers under the couch, and the quality, you know, we have the same TVs that we have in our house, the Samsungs and all of those high quality units. And certain, you know, demographics are going for to have the fun, and then there's certain demographics that go for, you know, to go for the family experience. They're all essentially, though, going for some kind of experience. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. I mean, the expectations are the same, if not more, than what you would have in your house.
Okay, good, thanks. Chuck, here's one for you. Many boaters think that Sat TV is a luxury that really only super yacht owners can afford. And that may have been true years ago, but it's changed, or it is changing perhaps. So what is your take on the affordability of satellite TV, and specifically, what are the costs involved in installing and operating a system?
All right, great question. I would tell you 20 years ago, that probably was the case, because you only saw the domes on the biggest boats in the world. And maybe I'm off by a couple of years, but as with all technology, as technology advances, and you get the next generation of new technology, the old technology becomes much more affordable. So the leading edge stuff is always a little bit more expensive. It's definitely it's for the early adopters, but then what it does leave us, and think of computers, think of cell phones, think of all that, right? Now we're seeing units. I honestly, I think in Azimuth we do a 47 standard with satellite TV, and we would have never dreamt of doing that years ago. But it's what we see from the customers, and I think the customers kind of break down into two categories, which makes your guys' world challenging. Some, they just want simplicity, easy to operate. They don't know what they don't know, which is hard to give them what they want when they don't know what they don't know. And then you have the other group that is, they know everything. They want it to match their house, and then they wonder why it's more expensive putting it in a boat than a house. But so you really have two kinds of clients, and you're definitely seeing the adoption of satellite TV into much smaller boats than you would have ever seen before.
Yeah,
It's volume and affordability and new technology that really pushes the price down of the old technology. And to say it's old really isn't the case, because you know, an iPhone 7 is still a wonderful phone, except you compare it to an iPhone 10 or 11, and you think, man, I need that, right? It's probably the best example I can give you on that.
yeah. Yeah. Well, staying with trends for a minute here. Are there other trends that you see in the market and the application for satellite TV systems on boats that are equipped, say, for cruising versus offshore fishing, or sail versus power? Do you see, you know, more satellite systems coming aboard closer to shore, farther offshore, smaller versus larger boats? Any other trends?
Well, you know, the trend is certainly it's minimally accepted. You got to have it on boats over 100 feet. I can't imagine that you don't have it. And it's pushing downward and downward. So now I would say it's 70 feet. I don't know that we have a boat 70 feet or bigger that doesn't have it. In our world, they want the ability to watch a different channel in every room, which I don't know that I would do, but that would be that's the prevailing wind. It's just easier to do it that way and give them that goes back to they don't know what they don't know. They know at their house, they have a box in every room and they can watch TV in every room. In a boat, I don't know that they use it as much as they think they're going to use it. But what I will say is in the main gathering area at night, when it's raining, when you can bring the family together and tie it around a sporting event, certainly sports is one of the things, sports and movies, and then the market, right? So you get people that want to stay in touch, see what's going on in the market. You certainly get the people that want to stay in touch with sports, and then movies as a family. So it's and I think you're going to see even more of that now as we're living in a world where we're huddling together more. And I think for the foreseeable future, we're going to be staying together as a family and tight-knit friends, closer, longer, instead of going out and, when you're traveling and instead of going out to dinner, you may eat on the boat and watch a movie. So I think this timing will have a pickup of product installed and maybe product utilized because the world's just changed a little bit. So that would be the trend that I see.
Yeah. Again, trends. Mark, one to you. There's a trend that we've seen fairly recently where boat owners don't necessarily have a TV, dedicated TV aboard, but they're using their multifunction displays, their MFDs, to watch TV on. What's that about? Do you install that type of a system? How do you do that?
Yeah, you can absolutely do that. So, even some of the smaller chart plotters or MFDs or multifunction displays have a video input. It might be like an analog input, which is like just that yellow RCA cable kind of a plug that will plug into it. The larger multifunction displays will have like an HDMI, which pretty much everybody is familiar with. And you can plug that video signal from your satellite receiver right into your chart plotter and watch it just like you would view like a camera system. You go to that input on your multifunction display and you're watching TV versus watching your camera. Now, you really should have more than one multifunction display on your helm if you're going to be watching TV and not watching your chart plotter, right? I mean, don't just fill the screen up with your TV. But yeah, I mean, we see this all the time on a boat that has 2 or 3 or 4 different multifunction displays. I mean, one of them always has, the TV signal or the receiver signal going into that. Now, people don't necessarily think about it, right off the bat, but then becomes, the issue becomes the audio. What do you do with the audio of that? Because those chart plotters don't have a stereo or speaker system in order for you to hear what's going on. I mean, you might be able to watch a game, you might be able to just, watch the market stuff, but you're not going to be able to hear anything. So, it's important that if you're going to do that and you're going to be able to watch the video on your chart plotter, that you take the audio signal from your receiver and put that into maybe the existing stereo system on your boat. And that's pretty simple. It's just like those red and white, RCA cables that can go right into maybe an aux input on your stereo. And then you'll be able to watch the TV on your chart plotter, and then with your existing stereo system on board, hit the aux input and be able to hear what you're watching. So, so that's important to think about. I mean, this is something that we do almost on every single install, especially if there's more than one, multifunction display. I mean, every captain, every owner, wants to be able to view their TV right there on their chart plotter, because you think about it, if they're doing a long crossing and they're just out at sea for 10 hours at a time looking at blue ocean, they got 1 or 2 screens. One's chart plotter, one's radar maybe or depth, and the other one is just specifically a movie, you know, so it happens all the time. Justin will probably tell you too, as he probably does it when he's delivering boats. So yeah, we do it all the time. It's included usually in our packages and what we do, for sure.
Yeah. Range for signal reception is a big deal for cellular. It's a big deal for Wi-Fi extenders. There are plenty of those on the market, but we're not dealing with that. We're dealing with satellite TV. So, Ken, how far can a boat venture offshore and still get a great signal?
All right, so right now, I would say about 250 miles offshore with a 1 meter antenna system. So what happens with that signal as it bleeds in the water, it's not as condensed as it is over land, so it starts to fade as it goes into the ocean. So with that being the case, you need a bigger reflector in order to collect enough energy to produce a video signal when you're that far offshore. So it's safe to say 2 to 250 miles offshore with a 1 meter antenna will still provide a strong enough signal to be able to have TV on board. I mean, there's some limitations once you get to the fringes of where that signal drops off, and that's determined by what they call EIRP or gain from the satellite transmission. And atmospheric conditions, just like having satellite TV at your house, can cause issues with the signal getting through once you're at that fringe level of the coverage area. So we provide a general coverage map on our website where you can see the different size antennas and how far offshore they can go and still get you that signal. And so that will help people in determining, you know, which antenna is right for them. Just to touch on something that Chuck and Justin were mentioning about the satellite TV systems and the trends, is that I think what we're seeing here is, you know, manufacturers pushing the envelope with making antennas smaller. So when they're smaller, they're able to be fitted on smaller size boats, down to 20-foot boats, all the way up to the biggest yachts in the world can accommodate satellite TV antennas. But as Mark was saying earlier, you know, you can put a 60 centimeter antenna on a 30-foot boat. It may look out of place, but it'll work, right? I mean, it's more of an aesthetics thing than anything else. But so it's just a matter of determining where the customer wants to go and still be able to watch satellite TV. That's really the very first question. And then you go from that to standard definition, high definitions, because there's some nuances with each provider on how they transmit that signal. I wanted to sort of insert myself on the local station question that was brought up. And you can get local stations, NBC, CBS, Fox, and ABC, provided that you have a Los Angeles and or New York billing address for DirecTV. And why they have that available throughout the country is because they service the airlines with DirecTV. So you'll see on JetBlue, when you fly across the country, you can watch New York or LA stations. And what that means is basically they're transmitting the local stations on a CONUS beam, which means continental United States. All the other local stations that are West Palm Beach, Fort Lauderdale, Miami, New Orleans, they're all spot beamed around a certain area around the city. So call it 50 to 100 miles around the city is where that signal for their local stations are being transmitted. And once you leave that area, then those local stations are gone because you're not in that viewing area. The only two exceptions are for LA and New York. If you have a billing address out of those two parts of the country, then you can get local stations anywhere in the country.
Okay. I've often heard kind of conversations, eavesdropping at boat shows, at booths, and a question that's often asked is, you know, can my kids watch one show and I'm watching a football game all live? Can several guests, can family members, can crew members, let's say you've got a half a dozen different needs aboard in terms of entertainment, can they all watch different programming simultaneously?
Is that for me?
That's the, yeah, sorry, Ken, yep.
Oh yeah, sure. Yes, the answer is yes. there's some nuances with that as it relates to Dish Network, and I'll get into that in a minute. With DirecTV, so 90% of the antennas out there for satellite television track one satellite, right? So they can only look at one bird at a time. And with DirecTV, 99% of their standard definition signal comes from the 101 slot, which is the satellite right above Texas. So in order to be able to watch independent programming on each television screen for all the guests and crew, each TV, like Mark said earlier, will need its own receiver, okay? So they're looking at 101, it's standard definition, and people are changing channels because all that content is on that one satellite. As it relates to Dish Network, they broadcast their content on 3 satellites on the East Coast and 3 satellites on the West Coast. So the challenge with having multiple receivers on a Dish Network scenario is that there's going to be one receiver that controls the antenna, right? So that antenna can only look at one satellite at a time. So if the salon is watching ESPN and somebody in the master bedroom wants to watch Home and Garden TV, but that Home and Garden TV happens to be on one of the other 2 satellites, they're not going to be able to see it because the antenna can only see one satellite at a time, and the master is going to control what that satellite looks like.
I see.
So with DirecTV, the answer is standard definition, absolutely. With our UHD7, you can do it with high definition as well. With Dish Network, it's a little quirky only because of the spreading of their content amongst multiple satellites. Does that make sense? Is that clear, or did I just confuse more people?
Well, we're going to give Chuck kind of a shot at it also, another bite of the apple. Chuck, once a customer decides on a Sat TV antenna, what service provider options are available, and what are the major differences? For example, Ken talked a little bit about DirecTV and Dish, but then there's international providers. And talk about it in terms of service provided and costs.
You know, that's one of the more interesting things is we see an awful lot of our clients will think this is a do-it-yourself type of project, or quite honestly, they come to us as a dealer. You know, we're 60 plus locations around the country. We flat out don't install it. We try to go with the most dependable system from the most dependable installer that you can get, so that you have the highest probability that you're going to have a good experience. Because let's face it, you're not watching this 30 days a month, and if you lose a day because your cable's down or your dish is down, it's 1 day out of 30. You're using these boats so rarely, and you have all your loved ones are there. So when you hit that button, you want it to work. And I don't want them calling me on something that my team did. So we call the best that we know. We buy the best systems that we can. And that's what we promote. And, I think when you really think about the dynamics of being on board a boat or a yacht, it's always with your loved ones. It's always, these are your big times. These are the pictures that stay in your phone for the rest of your life. It's just these times when it's down, it's big, right? If I go home tonight and my cable doesn't work, I'm not going to lose any sleep. But if I'm on my boat for my 1 week out of the month that I'm on it, or 1 week out of the quarter, I want it to work. So, sounds like it's a plug for these guys, but I would tell you, I wouldn't, we've got 500 technicians in our company, and we call these guys to come put it in.
Right. So Ken mentioned sort of the billing issue with different addresses, which leads into another question. And that's, if someone moves their boat from, say, Florida to the West Coast, what is involved to make sure that the TV system works properly on the West Coast? I mean, is that a programming issue? Or is that an installation adjustment? What's necessary?
From a
And
DirecTV
let's go
standpoint,
Ken and then Justin on that.
oh, I'm sorry, I'm trying to monopolize everyone's
Ken,
time.
yeah, Ken,
I
you first
apologize.
and then Justin.
So when you move a boat, and we're talking DirecTV world here, Jim, from the west or east coast to the west coast, there's really nothing I have to do except press the button to turn it back on with the KVH system. As it relates to Dish Network, which again has multiple satellites on the east and multiple satellites on the west, it's a slight configuration with our app that we use to change the antenna from looking at the what they call the eastern arc of Dish Network satellites to the western arc of Dish Network satellites, and just do a reboot and it'll go and find those satellites. So there's really no heavy lifting involved whatsoever.
Justin, is that the same report that you get from your captains and owners?
Yeah. So if it goes to say Fort Lauderdale to, yeah, literally just turn it on and it'll still track. It'll pick up the 101 satellite. The only thing I might add to that is, let's say you were taking the boat on its own bottom to the west coast of the United States from Fort Lauderdale. And Ken, correct me here, but I believe you would go out of the South Florida market and you would jump into Mexico and then Panama. So you would have to have I guess a regional capable dome set up prior to making that trip in order to have working sat TV throughout your whole trip. How would that scenario go ahead, Ken?
I mean, I'll answer it and Mark can add to it as well, because I'm sure he has customers that do the same thing. So if you're talking about wanting to have a constant satellite TV signal, and it doesn't matter who the provider is, if we're switching providers going back and forth here, then if you go from, Florida through the Gulf of Mexico, you can jump on the Dish Network 77 beam, which basically is in our world, in the KVH world, it's a program to the app to have it look at 77 West. But again, you're going to need a subscription to Dish, and you're going to also have to have a Dish Network receiver bank to feed the TVs on board if the primary provider for that boat is DirecTV. So you can do a sort of back and forth where you cut through an area, change over to Dish Network with the programming change on the app, activate the Dish Network receivers through that area if DirecTV doesn't cover it. And then once you get back onto the West Coast where you're in DirecTV footprint range, then you obviously switch your antenna to look at the DirecTV satellites versus Dish. And that's all done through a handheld app. But again, you're going to have both receivers on board and both service providers activated.
Okay.
Somebody mentioned do-it-yourself earlier, and I wanted to kind of pick up on that. On boats, some installations are fairly simple, others are extremely complicated. Mark, do you have any advice for a boat owner who may be considering installing their own SAT TV system? And frankly, what's involved in a SAT TV install?
Well, there are several things to consider, when installing satellite TV. If you are going to want to do it yourself, you want to look at like the location of the antenna. You got to remember that these are satellite antennas that are moving, and they need to look up into the sky. So you got to keep them away from any blockage, and there can't be anything directly in front of them. So you want to consider that if the boat has a mast, like a sailboat mast, or another type of radar mast or something like that, there can't be anything in front of them. I mean, if you are on a sailboat, then usually the dome has to be up somewhere on the mast, which is not the easiest do-it-yourself type of job. Where are you going to mount the satellite receivers? If you want high definition, in a lot of cases, they have to be pretty close to the TV. And, the wire runs. I mean, the majority of our installation is just running wire throughout the boat. And, these boats look great a lot of times, but they're not always great to run wires through them, So, some great boat builders like OA have great wire runs and you can get through them and that's pretty easy to do. There's others that, you spend half your day disassembling the boat just to move the cable, 10 feet. So, you want to definitely think about that, and these boats come apart like in a puzzle a lot of times, and they have to go back the same way without any damage. And that is a difficult thing. So, definitely that's a big thing. The wire runs are a really big thing, would I call this a DIY project? I don't know. I mean, I guess you could, I guess I give you this analogy, maybe during COVID that we're all used to, you can probably cut your own hair, like we all maybe have done, except for you, Justin. But yeah, but it always will turn out a lot better if you get a professional to do it, right? So
And then that.
Right.
So Chuck,
I
at
thought about
Marine
it,
Max,
believe
do
me.
you guys have conversations about haircutting also? No, about DIY. Do you have conversations
Yeah,
with
I've
customers
got
who may
3
say, look,
haircuts at home.
I'd like to try this
And,
myself?
It's funny.
Yeah, how's
There's,
that
I probably get more conversation on the costs, right? So they think they don't always get what labor should cost, and they don't get that. Sometimes you'll pay a plumber $150 to drive to your house and work for an hour, and you just thank him when he's done. But when you bill 150 hours in the boat business, it's a Shakespearean tragedy. It's such a big deal that they don't always get it. So I probably get more pushback on that than I do on the do-it-yourself. They don't always get that part of it. But I'll tell you, when you're in the Bahamas and you want the thing to work and you have your family around and you're ready to watch your movie or the game, you're thankful that you did it the right way.
I'm going to ask one more question, then we're going to move to some of the questions that came in. And this one I'm not going to ask it of anybody in particular, but I'll just kind of throw it out there for whoever wants to answer it. And it's basically this, that a lot of people want to stream entertainment options like Netflix on their boat via LTE. So the question for some of us is, define LTE and describe some of the differences in costs and options between streaming and satellite TV. Whoever wants to answer that, just pick it up.
Well, I can chat a little bit about it. KVH definitely offers an LTE product. We, as dealers and installers, we get that question a lot now. Everybody is streaming, Netflix, different things. They want to watch their latest episode of Ozark or whatever is going on. So internet, on the boat is going hand in hand with satellite TV. It's almost like they got to have both. There's certain things that, the streaming side of things offer that the satellite doesn't, and there's certain things that the satellite TV offers that the streaming doesn't. So we are installing pretty much every single one of our installations includes a satellite TV system and like an LTE system or some sort of cellular systems for streaming and having internet and that type of stuff. So in most cases, we're doing both. And a larger yachts all have both systems on board. So there is a cost obviously associated with that, but you can add it to your business plan. There's other providers locally and and stuff that offer, you know, unthrottled type of marine internet providers. So, KVH offers, service as well. So, there's different options for the boater for getting LTE service as well. So.
Yeah. Okay, so looking at questions that have come in, we've got, I guess, 9 questions that came in. Some are two-parters. So I'm just going to throw them out again to anybody who would like to respond. And quite a few of them have to do with DirecTV and Dish. So one here from Doug is, what do you see as the future of DirecTV and Dish Network as compared to many that are streaming TV today? Anybody want to project?
It's a great question. It's a great question. And I mean, as long as they have the population in rural areas that are subscribing to their service, I believe that, they'll continue to offer satellite TV, as a way to bring content into the home for those customers that aren't around big cities. I mean, that's how they originated with their plan in the first place. So they may condense some of their content on a single satellite versus having, the HD content on 2 Ka band satellites, which are next to, the 101 standard definition satellite. So that may be something that they'll do sort of this to be more efficient with transmitting content as people, cut. I mean, let's be honest, they're cutting the cord and going with streaming at home. But outside of that, I wish I could predict the future. I just think they're still going to be able to offer content. Maybe it's just condensed on a single bird versus having it sort of split out amongst 3 as they're doing today.
So the second part to that question is, does DirecTV or Dish Network offer pay-as-you-go service? It says, if you're not boating in the winter in the Great Lakes, for instance, can you suspend service? Or are you committed to a long-term contract?
I mean, Dish offers pay-as-you-go today, so they can do month-to-month. DirecTV, I do not believe they allow for pay-as-you-go, but I'm not sure if they're, hitting people for suspending their service when they're not using their boat. Maybe Mark can, if he's got customers that have experience, can speak to that. But I know Dish, you can do pay-as-you-go.
Yeah, I think you can suspend, but I'm not 100% sure because we don't really get involved in the actual DirecTV activation side of things. But if you go online, you could probably simply check, the DirecTV site. But I believe you can suspend it, but there's probably some nominal charge, every month while it's in suspension.
So another question has to do, this is from Charles, what it has to do with is a boat that may be moving from the US waters to Europe. Now we talked about from the East Coast to the West Coast of the US, but what about transatlantic travel if you wind up somewhere in Europe or beyond?
Okay. I mean, I can speak to it unless somebody else wants to take it.
Go ahead, Ken.
Okay, so when you go from the US to any other part of the world, specifically Europe and Asia, you're not going to obviously get any sort of television content in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean because, again, they only transmit, whether it's us or anybody overseas, they only transmit their content over land. That's where their paying customers are. We just take advantage of that bleed into the water. But once you get into Europe, the way the US guys transmit their signal down to Earth is, I'll give you a little demonstration. It's what they call circular polarization, right? And that requires a circular LNB in the US. But once you get abroad, they transmit it in linear, so it sort of goes zigzag. And all that means is that there will be a hardware change to the antenna to swap out that LNB, so it's a linear version LNB versus the US version LNB.
And the receiver is able to operate with that new equipment?
Not the receiver here in the US. They would have to subscribe just like they were here in the US, get a box for the provider out in Europe, and also change the LNB and the hardware. Those are the 2 things they would have to do.
Okay. Here's a pretty specific question from Jess. He says, I can watch TV in the Bahamas, but I lose it in San Salvador. So is that simply a matter of changing providers? What's going on there?
It could be a matter of dish size, depending on how big his dish is. Because again, the smaller antennas will cut off before the larger antennas will in specific areas, but it could also be a footprint problem where they just stop transmitting in that area. And if it does get picked up by a different provider in San Salvador, then you would, again, need to get boxes from that provider and subscribe to their service. But the antenna should be able to look at that satellite just like it would in the US.
So at the expense of working you too hard, Ken, here's another one. You're probably the best.
Bring it on, baby.
So this is from Jeff. He says, I'm a Midwest lake house boat owner, 77-footer. He's got a KVH HD7 and DirecTV. Is there anything new for incorporating internet into the HD7 for downloading movies from DirecTV?
Yeah, there isn't. So with DirecTV and all the satellite TV providers, the antenna that we make or anyone else makes in order to receive that signal is a receive-only antenna system. And it's receiving just that TV broadcast. Any sort of VSAT solution or LTE solution would be in a different antenna entirely. So yeah, unfortunately, there's nothing. I mean, he's got a great HD7, which is high definition DirecTV. It's like sitting in your house, with, have 15 receivers on board. Everybody can watch whatever they want to watch in HD, but unfortunately there's no sort of internet solution that you can plug onto that.
Okay, well, that pretty much wraps up the questions that have come in. And, I would just throw it open to the panel. Is there any aspect of satellite TV that we really haven't discussed that would be important to a boater either coming into this, looking at her first satellite TV system, or, a veteran who might be looking to upgrade his second or third system on a new boat? Anybody?
I mean, I'll start by just sort of tagging on to what Justin was saying earlier about experience, right? So, I mean, having satellite TV on board, in my opinion, is something where you don't have to sacrifice time, right? So you're out fishing with your friends, you have a football game that starts at 4. Instead of, getting back to the dock and jumping in your car and going to a bar or your house to watch the TV game or the football game on a home screen, I mean, you can watch it on your boat and fish at the same time. So it's an experience that people should sort of understand, that it saves you time. It gives you this wonderful experience that you can feel as though, you're part of what's happening as it's happening. One of the analogies that I use for people, if I was at a boat show and I was hugging them and just talking to them about, hey, how much money would you pay? And I'm sorry for any Atlanta Falcon fans out there that, watching the Super Bowl when it was 28-3, the Pats were losing, how much money would you have paid to be able to watch that moment in time where they came back and won the Super Bowl, right? Some people, they would say, I'd pay $5,000 if I was able to watch that thing. I mean, that was great experience. I could celebrate with all my friends. We were all jolly. I mean, so it's sort of subjective, but what it does, it allows you to have that emotional feeling to what's happening as it's happening while you're doing what you love, which is boating. So, I mean, you've got to ask yourself that question, but that's kind of what we like to promote at KVH, is all about customer experience, and that's what TV is. The antennas are just a conduit to what they're actually buying. They're buying that experience, which is television. The antenna just gets it there for them.
And I would shamelessly say there's no better way to upgrade your system than to buy a new boat.
Great.
It doesn't have satellite TV so that we can install it. There we go. That's even better.
Right on.
There's a question that I wasn't going to ask, but we've got a few minutes, and I'm going to throw it out there. And I don't know if anybody has an answer to this, but several years ago, there was sort of there were a couple of companies that were going toward replacing the 3-axis dome systems with beam forming. So there would be electronic beam forming of the signals rather than mechanically facing the satellite and keeping locked on it. Haven't heard much about that lately. Does anybody have any update about beam forming?
I don't. I mean, we at KVH, we sort of have that technology already for vehicles. So we make antennas that are flat that bend the beam for automobiles, which is called the TrackVision A9. So on land, you can have antenna that tracks DirecTV as you're going down the road without having a big old bubble on top of your car. It's 5 inches and it's flat. So the physics of beam forming on a boat on flat panels is such that, you know, from what I understand, is that it doesn't have great look angles. You need multiple panels, and it doesn't work well in weather where most of the people want to watch TV is when it's bad outside. So there's some limitations to just finding a spot for the panels to be able to accommodate for pitch, roll, and yaw, which is why you have a 3-axis antenna under a dome, is because that's the most efficient way of being able to track those satellites. Whereas, you know, having panels on a boat, they're flat, they're not moving, and they're just not efficient and ready for prime time. Otherwise, you wouldn't see KVH antennas on boats in the marina. You would see flat panels.
Yeah, good.
So I'll just add something to that, Jim, if you would let me. So
Sure, please.
You know, yeah, KVH has had those panels. You know, if you look at like the JetBlue and the Southwest, they all have those types of flat panels on the top of airplanes. So, and you get it, but you know, if you've ever been in the airplane and they make like a sharp turn, you lose the satellite signal for a second, and then it comes back on once they level out. So that's kind of, you on a boat, you know what I mean, with the pitch roll, and you know, it just wouldn't, you know, in my opinion, it wouldn't work, and that's why the 3-axis works a whole lot better. So I'm sure that you guys have been on an airplane and the satellite TV is cut out for a second as they were turning. So that's pretty much what Ken was saying. So.
Great, good. Well, thanks. I appreciate that.
Hey, Jim,
Well, anyway,
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Ken, go.
There's a question that came in about receivers. I don't know if you saw that. Natalie just mentioned it to me about who can provide receivers. So, I mean, I'm going to give you a shameless plug here, but all our TrackVision TV series antennas, you have the ability to get a free dish or DirecTV receiver. And in addition to that, we can help you get it activated because we have an in-house DirecTV activation team that sort of is much easier to deal with than with DirecTV just because of the size of that company and what they deal with on a day-to-day basis versus what we deal with. So you can get your receivers from us. Sorry, Jim, for interrupting.
Okay, no. So if nothing else, we've arrived at 3 o'clock. So I would thank the audience for tuning in. I'd also like to thank the panel. I think that's been a great conversation. And so thank you all. Have a good day. Stay safe.
Thank you,
Jim.
Jim. Appreciate it.
Bye now.
Take care.